We're going to get started. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. Mr. Treasurer, can we call the roll?
Mr. Brown? He is listening in by phones, but not counted as present.
Yep.
Mr. Cole?
Present.
Mr. Green? Ms. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Jordan? Mr. Miller? Mr. Ragland? You have a quorum.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Okay. What I want to do is make sure we walk through the agenda very quickly. Again, want to be timely. So I appreciate everybody being here. Thank you, Mr. Brown, for being in attendance, and I do again hope all is well with you. First and foremost, of course, we'll approve our minutes. We'll move into the monthly financial report for May 2019. We'll go over the budget requests that entail the several action items that you see before you. For those who may not have that in front of you, that is for legal services, academic services, communication, and business and operations. We'll then walk into operations maintenance for capital improvement funding, kind of the process and timing discussion of that, and move into bond issuance update and adjourn. So first and foremost, can we approve the minutes? Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Move to approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
Mr. Cole?
Yes.
Mr. Green? Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Miller? That motion carried.
All right, awesome. Financial monthly report.
Okay,
Treasurer
thank you.
Hort.
This is the monthly financial report for May, the next last month of the fiscal year, believe it or not. This month, as in the past, revenues are up on a year-to-date basis, $33 million, or about 4%. But for the first time this year, I've had to turn the arrow on expenditures the other direction and color it red, because we are now above on expenditures by about 1%, or $12 million. And you'll see the drivers for that in a minute. We still, though, have the cash balance up about $20 million over what we had planned originally. The highlights for this report are as follows. In revenue, the really only highlight we have that's noteworthy is, once again, in other revenues. Pilots are running $15 million ahead, year-to-date ahead of plan. Interest income is up $6 million. Those two have continued to grow each month. And we've talked in the past, and I may mention it later, about how we're going to account for that somewhat, or have accounted for that in our forecast. The Medicaid reimbursement, which was accounting for about $3.8 million of this favorable variance, I believe I mentioned last month that they were catching up in that reimbursement cycle, and we have in fact received the second Medicaid payment for this fiscal year. So that's just a matter of timing. So we got two this year. We'll still get one next year, but I believe we're getting very caught up now. So that, what I thought would be a favorable variance that would work itself out, in other words, disappear, will in fact be intact and stay there. So we'll be up that $3.8 million for the fiscal year. On the expenditure side, this was the next three pay month, that, as you recall, back in November, because of the way we estimated the spread of pays between 24 two-pay months and 2 3-pay months. The November one was, there was a fairly large variance. We were anticipating that while it looked we were running substantially below plan for personnel, that this month would be somewhat of a correction for us, again, as a 3-pay plan. It didn't work out to be quite as large of a difference, but as it works out, it was over plan. And salary and wages now stand at about $3.4 million year-to-date under plan, or 0.9%. So on the salary and wages portion of personnel, we're pretty much spot on, 0.9%. My apologies, it's very close. Yeah, the benefit side, though, continues, we've described in the past. It's running about 4% under plan, 6.7 million year-to-date under, so that's the components of that 10 million under plan variance. Charters, again, it's what we've anticipated are running under plan again this month, and are on target to hit the spreads that I'll mention to you here in a minute. And then also this month, the other financial highlight is, as the committee recommended and the board approved, we executed the transfers and posted those on the books, so you'll see that reflected in these statements as well. Looking at the major revenue categories, very little activity. There was some manufactured home receipts received and property taxes, very small amount, but it's relatively unchanged at 4.9 million favorable, which is I think this number is like 0.97%, but it's certainly less than 1% variance there. State aid came in about 1.8 million above plan, and because of the way it was been planned out, and you'll see it in the charts in the MD management discussion and analysis, we expect that to happen, to continue again next month. But anyway, 1.8 million on the month above plan brought us to about 1.7 above plan, so we were below plan before this. Now we're above plan. That's about 1%. Again, if we come in 1.8 above plan again, we should hit that 3.6 million above plan that I've been talking about and anticipating. All other revenues then is a pretty big number, 26.9 above plan, and we'll talk about that in a second, which is probably right here. Restricted grants, this is the reimbursement for our Q-Scoobies, or Qualified School Construction Bonds, and that's just a timing difference. We planned for it this month. It comes in next month. I was a month off on the first payment, too, so that'll work itself out to zero. Property tax allocation, no real change there. It's about 1.5 million above plan. Other revenues, though, are the big culprits we've talked about. There's the 25 million year-to-date variance. So, and that's pilots and interest income and Medicaid. Other financing sources, nothing noteworthy. The breakdown on a percentage basis, pretty much similar to previous months on a year-to-date basis. Of course, this pie chart is very much a function of timing because we get property taxes kind of all in a lump sum at one point in time, so it can be distorted, but that's how it looks. It'll probably stay that way for the balance of the year. Moving on to expenditures, as you can see here, again, personnel down about 2% or 10 million. And let me jump forward real quick. This is the variance graph that I put together, the orange lines being the year-to-date as it changes month to month. And then the blue bars are the over-under. So you can see back in November, fairly high unfavorable variance. But then in this past month, May, unfavorable, but only to the tune of a little over $1 million. So that's how we got back to just 10 million under plan year-to-date. Again, that variance of salary wages is about 0.9% and 4% on benefits. So going back and hang on a minute. Going back and continuing to look, charter is about 5 million under plan. And again, we expect that to continue a little bit. And all other expenditures now kind of stand out here because that's where there's a 27 million over plan variance. And that is the category in which we've posted the transfers. And the transfers were 30,870,000. As you can see here. So purchase services and supplies and materials and capital outlay, same story as in previous months. Purchase services running under because those are the tuition and utility accounts that are running under that we make sure that we budgeted sufficient for. Supplies and material now running over plan a bit. A lot of this is end of the year purchases. As they get close to the end of the year, money's being moved around to buy stuff at the end of the year. Capital outlay is, again, still running over plan, as we have always talked about. A lot of that has to do with that carryover purchase order from the previous year. Nothing exciting in the debt category or other category, but in other uses, that's where you see that large over plan variance. And that's where we've posted 30 million for the transfer of the Dominion Brookhaven Dominion Brookhaven North, I just lost track of the last school building, Brookhaven, Dominion North realignment, and then the $870,000 for WCBE is included there. Breakdown of expenditures, this is kind of interesting. I probably should have kept the graph from last month so you can see the comparison, because on the right-hand side, the blowout part of this pie chart, the other uses, that darker orange part is now 4%. Typically, that's 1%. So other, over on the left-hand side, went from about 11% to 4% because of that $30 million transfer. And then charter and personnel have dropped down respectively. Charter is usually around 22 or 23%, with personnel at 66 or 67%. So these are the types of, when you have these one-off transactions that can distort these relationships. So you have to, a year from now, we're going to have to remember, if we make comparisons back to this year, these are the events that cause those kinds of temporary distortions. Our variance analysis, again, pretty straightforward. The one that catches your eye here first would be the restricted funds, kind of right in the middle of the graph. It's a very small amount but large percentage, but again, that's due to timing. It will work itself out. And then all other revenues, again, just another graphical display of where the focus in our analysis has been in terms of explaining why the variances have occurred. Recapping again on other revenues, up year-to-date $15 million in pilots, up $6.5 million over plan. Year-to-date in investment income, and then that $3.7 million Medicaid reimbursement will remain true to the end of the year. Just showing you some other revenues. We're now at $16.9 million year-to-date in pilot payments. We had put in the forecast about $2 million, or in the plan about $2 million. So we have adjusted for that. Looking at expenditures, this chart is largely distorted by the other uses, as you can see. So other uses, again, that's where the transfers out were. I took those out so you could see a highlight of just those, the other remaining categories. And again, personnel, variance, large in dollar amount but small in variance. Purchase services, $7.5 million variance, about 13%, I think that reads. Charter, $4.5 million, almost $5 million. And then the rest are somewhat negligent. Negligent, is it? Negligible. What is the word? Negligible. Yeah. Negligent. We're not negligent. We're negligible. So we'll get that right word. A little accounting humor, I guess. I don't know. Very. Thank you, President Baker. And so that's the report. For May, revenues, are up. Expenditures, because of that, the one-off transaction, are now over plan. And but we're still up in cash, so that's good.
Any questions? Awesome. Okay. Moving right along to budget requests. Dr. Dixon, you have someone that?
Yep, thank you.
Mr. Gooding.
The next category, we've got one additional request for additional funds for FY19 for legal services. Wanda Lillis with our legal services team is here to kind of talk briefly about that and see if anyone has any questions.
Yes, thank you. Legal Services is requesting an additional $50,000 in which to pay the bills and invoices for the remainder of the fiscal year. It has been an extraordinary year in terms of lawsuits and settlements. In February of 2019, Mr. Braverman presented to the board, and the board approved a settlement in the amount of $120,000. In addition, in May 21st of 2019, the board was also presented a settlement of $105,000, which was approved at that point in time. I would also note for the record that on Friday, Legal Services received a check from United Educators in the amount of $63,568.85, which I promptly and quickly took over to the Treasurer's office. And that is the amount over the district's self-insured retention, which is $100,000. So in the original case where the settlement was $120,000, the insurance paid out $20,000, and then also paid out anything, attorney's fees, expenses, cost above that $100,000. And so that was the purpose behind the $63,000 check. I would also anticipate that the district would receive a similar, although lesser, amount with respect to the $105,000 settlement as well.
And are there any questions at this point? Thank you. So you're requesting that we approve this?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
And this is something that is above and beyond what we've seen historically. So when we go through the annual budget process, we estimated at that time that the budget that was set would be sufficient for the normal everyday claims that we've had, which it was. But these obviously were outliers that were there that we need to adjust the appropriation for to get these paid.
Okay. So is there a motion to approve this and accept this expenditure?
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Miller? Mr. Cole?
Yes.
Mr. Green? Motion carried.
Thank you, Ms. Lillis. All right. So that motion passes?
Oh, did I say motion carried? I thought I said motion carried. My bad.
My apologies. So moving forward to FY 2020 budget.
Okay. We are now switching from FY19, going forward to FY20. There are 4 items on here. I'll kind of highlight where we are with these 4. The first 3 are additional staffing requests that, as the committee recalls, we've gone through a lot of presentations on the non-personnel budget requests for all of the departments that we go through with our budgeting process. We go through for a 5-year look that feeds into the 5-year forecast. We've also gone through looking at the remaining FTE that were there as part of the November 2016 levy plan. That the original plan was for 324.5 FTE over that time frame. We made some very difficult decisions when state revenue was less than was expected. We delayed some of those positions from 19 and 20, and we delayed those to FY21. And we knew that with the improving cash balance, we had an opportunity to bring some of those FTE back early from the previous action to address some of those social emotional needs that we identified now. So with that, we had 159 positions left. We brought back 51 positions for FY20. After we went through that process and had presented them here to FAC, there are some adjustments that we would like to make. So those are items 5.1, 2, and 3. And then, so Dr. Dixon was going to kind of talk about that, and then I'll come back at 5.04 and finish it up.
Thank you. Dr. Dixon?
As Scott has stated, first I want to say they have some very good processes and procedures in place in the budget office, in the accounting office. He has guided this process and really held us to some deadlines that we should have met. But I'm going to ask on behalf of the team, and we have his support. But I wanted to state to you that this additional ask has nothing to do with the processes and procedures that the team have put in place. But we went back and looked at some critical additions for our nurses and our safety and security. We want to make sure that our students have our support, the supports they need in the buildings, and that our buildings are safe. And during my 100 days, I've been hearing over and over again that we have some safety issues. I asked the safety director to bring back a plan to us to say what did he feel comfortable with, the number of additional people that we need, and he stayed 24. And I felt that we have the money to do it, although we had missed the deadline. And I share with the team that I will explain to you why I'm asking for those, knowing that the deadline has passed. But we would have an additional 24 security staff in our buildings, which would take our total, I believe, to 80. So 84, thank you. That would allow us to have security staff in middle school, high school, and some of our elementary schools. Right, thank you. But it has nothing to do with the processes and procedures that the team has put in place.
And there were two
And two
communications.
two communications people, right. So we have a new communications, Chief of Communications, Scott Wortman, who's sitting here. And we're going to have a new communications strategy. And part of that strategy is telling our narrative. And we want to be able to tell the story of what we're doing well in the district. And to do that, we wanted to add some additional personnel that are going to be some story writers. So people that have the background in writing and be able to help us lift that strategic strategy with communications. So that's why, yes. And Scott, this is his second day. So we have two Scotts now in the communications department. So that's why that particular request is coming late. And I hope that we won't have any more, but we may, because this is a transition year. And so I hope that that would be appropriate for this team, knowing that it is a transition year for me, and making sure that we are staffed appropriately for next year, and making sure we meet the critical needs of our students and our staff throughout the district.
Are there any questions at this point?
The amount that we're requesting for the additional staffing?
I can,
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
I can answer that for you. For the nursing FTE, and just a little bit of of how this interacts with the levy piece too, because there is some of this. The nursing FTE, we had remaining FTE that were allocated in FY '21, so we're not looking to increase them overall. We're just bringing 2 from FY '21 early in FY '21. It's about 179,000 for those 2. The communication FTE are new positions in addition to the levy position. That's about 108,000 for those. And the safety and security piece, we did have scheduled for this year 7 as part of the levy plan, but the 24 is in addition to that. So that additional piece is about 1.3 million.
And again, Dr. Dixon, this is something that generally attributes to your vision for the district. It's kind of proactive. Is that safe to argue?
Yes, it is. The nurses, and I'm transparent, that was an oversight, right? So that was definitely an oversight. We've had some transitions of some team members who've left the district in the last couple months. So that was an item that didn't get where we're supposed to be in the timeline it should have gotten there, right? The communications was part of that communication strategy. The 7 safety and security, yes, we moved those up. We've also added 2 SROs, but the additional ones was us just being transparent and saying, what do we need to make sure that our students and our staff are safe in the buildings? And that's a non-negotiable. We know our families, students want to feel safe, and then they learn, right? So we had some additional dollars, and we felt that would be a good use of those funds.
Thank you. And this is also a request for approval to submit to the board?
Right, and then what will happen with these is are currently fed into item 5.04, and if you want me to continue, I can kind of go right into that if that's okay.
Please feel free.
And then we can come back with these. So what we've done is with all of the presentations that the committee's heard since March, on the non-personnel side, and most of them have been solely focused on the general fund because that's where the tax revenue is, that's the operating fund. Everything else is fairly restrictive in use. Food service revenue is for food service operations. We can't do much other than food service with those. The state and federal grants, they're very restricted dollars for very restricted uses. So what we have here is all the positions that are here, the additional positions, as well as the ones we've already communicated, are all included in the draft appropriation resolution that you see in 5.04. So this is the FY20 appropriation resolution that includes everything that's here. So what we would like to do is, and we have in the past with these positions, if we can get the approval on those FTE requests, and then we can kind of talk into the appropriation, but that's how it all fits.
Okay. I thank you. Is there a motion to approve?
Are we taking 1 through 4 altogether, or just 1 through 3 right now?
Well, I was going to talk about 5.04. but-
Okay, so
Okay,
we're,
no, then,
Is that okay?
yeah, then let's
Okay.
go through it all. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I
Okay.
didn't
No, no, no.
realize you,
I can do that.
just
Go
tell me
ahead.
what you want to do. I wanted to make sure,
we're gonna
'cause-
go through the entire, so
we can do that.
01 through 04.
Okay, so on 5.04, this is the appropriation resolution. If, trying to think, so the board members were here, I'm not sure if the committee members were not committee members at the time, but I knew when I was hired in February of 2014, the district was going through a lot of change and challenges. We changed the way, actually, Stan tells the story, but I'm gonna tell it anyways. We changed the way we do our budget process, and I came in, and then Stan came in right behind me, and we wanted to do things very differently. So legally, on the appropriation resolution, the auditor state establishes the minimum threshold to do is to approve at the fund level. So what you see before you on this appropriation resolution is everything is approved at the fund level with the exception of the general fund. And that's why we go through all this process, and it is, budget season is from July 1 through June 30th. It doesn't ever stop, and the reason for that is because our budget plan, the numbers before you are not driven from the financial operations of the district. And you've seen those in those presentations with all the hard work that the folks have done. Because what we've done is come up with a financial plan that is driven by program, driven by services, that is driven by and aligned with our strategic plan. So we no longer do strategic planning and financial planning separately. It happens every single day, with everything that we do. So that's why we go through all those presentations and break everything down. That's why here you'll see the general fund broken down in two major categories. One, personnel, salaries and benefits, which includes the FTE that we just talked about. And then the non-personnel piece is all of the stuff. It's the pens, it's the mice, all the things that we do, the programs and services, the tangible things. So that's where the department budget managers get up and present those. And they talk about how these resources are used to support the vision of their department that are aligned to district goals, that are aligned from our strategic plan. So that's why we go through this very extensive process, unlike any in the state that I've seen. And we got a lot of criticism from some of our peers, but we believe it's the right way to do it. We're talking about this, we're debating it, we're presenting it, having those real hard conversations because we're looking at data to make sure that the programs and services we're bringing before the board for approval are making a difference in the academic offerings that we're delivering to our kids. That's what it's about. So here's the kind of final product of all this work that we've done, and now all the presentations now become, it's the numbers. So it's everything that we've requested is here in front of you, as well as the other funds. And one thing I've added new, just as a point of reference, because the numbers can get somewhat boring, is we've added kind of a glossary of terms behind it that came from the Auditor of State's office that talks about what each fund is. In case you have trouble sleeping tonight, this will help. But just another piece to put that information out there, so if somebody wants to know what a particular fund is, if they want to know more about Title I, they can go in here and find what the statutory, the catalog of federal, the number is. They can find out that it's about funds to supplement for our economically disadvantaged students. They can get more information there than what we've given before. We're just trying to constantly beef that process up. Some other things that are included online as part of this item is there's a statistical section that you'll see that breaks down the budget request by our operating unit. So you will see what's being requested for supplies and materials for any particular school building, any particular department. I think that, I will warn you, it's a 244-page document. The other three pieces are the presentations from the previous FAC meetings. They go back to what those requests were, so they're all aligned. I just wanted to have all that information there. Easy place to find it if somebody want to go back and see what the presentation from March was, it's here. The next step is what we're doing now is from taking the numbers and looking at it more from a narrative standpoint, that all the departments are taking this and putting these into what we call our budget narratives. So we will take those budget narratives as well as the statistical tables into one pretty big document that will be presented to the board along with the appropriation resolution for approval at next Tuesday's meeting.
And then the requests that Dr. Dixon just outlined, those are included in
Those are included in here, correct. So the total amount for the FY '20 appropriation resolution is $1,523,268,615. Of that, the general fund piece, which is our major driver, it's the operating fund, is $945,607,914. So just to keep that in perspective.
Is there any questions? Yes, Mr. Ragland? When will that completed document be given to the board?
The plan is to have that ready Friday. So the team is putting the finishing touches on that today. Well, they've been working on it, but those documents are due to me by the end of the day tomorrow, so that we can turn that around, pull everything together, and hopefully have that out in advance of the board meeting, so that you'll have time to review that.
And then the board's to vote on it on
The
Tuesday?
board will vote on the FY 2020 appropriation resolution on Tuesday, yes.
Any concerns?
So it's kind of the end result of all the work that we've done for the last 3 months.
So, well, here's the piece. Just to put this, because I realize how complex it may seem and how big a document this is. What we've done in lead up to this point is, first of all, been given a few presentations exactly on what OPUs are looking to be funded, where those amounts are. We've additionally had conversation and approval of any additional funds that have been requested for the past 2 FAC meetings. We've also gone through an exhaustive 5-year forecast as well that aligns with this document. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So we've had several different iterations of discussion around this. And the information is transparent and available. You also have a treasurer and a director of budget for the district on hand if you have any questions. But what we'd like to do is be able to refer this to the budget for actual business this Tuesday. And I'm certainly prepared to do that. Do you have any other questions? Because I want to make sure.
I guess the size of the document as it's being explained, and the time frame between when we get the document and when we're to vote on the document is a concern to me. You know, I may be alone in my thinking, but I like to read stuff before I vote on it.
Understood.
And, you know, and I understand, I've been a part of the presentations, I've been a part of things that have happened, but if the document is as big as I'm being told, I do have some concerns for some of my other colleagues that have not sat at this table for finance, that may not have had a large enough time frame to really digest that document.
Yeah.
And, you know, I guess for me, you know, I would hope that things like a budget appropriation would be given to me well in advance of, you know, 3 days before I'm to vote on a document like that.
Ms. Johnson?
What document, is it not this then that they received?
That's
what
what
we
will be
received.
voted on, is the appropriation resolution. It's that document. And the information that we're talking about is supplementary information to that
Okay.
document.
Okay.
So it's all the presentations, it's everything that we've presented. We're putting it in a statistical format, some narrative around it, but it's all driven off of the presentations that you've received, which feed into the document that Ms. Johnson is holding, yes. And, I mean, it doesn't make it any better, but we've actually scaled it back from, I think, that first year, it was 945-page document. It was
what?
It was a monster.
I
So
mean,
we've been able to
Yeah, I
Dense
mean,
that a
I
little bit,
guess
right.
that was my interpretation, that I would be getting that document. Like
Yes.
the 900.
That will be there, that will support, that is the supplementary information that supports the information that you have before you today. So you're not approving that document, you're approving the numbers in the
The
appropriation
actual number of
resolution,
the
yes.
appropriation, that's what we're approving. The other information, as they've stated, is merely supplementary. It's for you to have the ability to look through it and say, oh, okay, OPU 504 is personnel-based or whatever it is, and be able to have a short narrative exactly explaining what that appropriation is and how much it is. So it's just something that gives clearer understanding of what each line item represents.
And then the supplement also is just what we've been discussing the last 3 months,
Correct.
right? And the board has also heard all that information.
Yes, and any number of iterations, and especially as we talk about lead up for approval of the 5-year forecast this past May. Yes.
As well as, you know, the general public, because I think, you know,
Right.
we've got a great team here in the communication group that this will be available for anybody to
But
hear.
I do want to say, I hear the substance of your statement. So what I want to make sure we do is post today's meeting, making sure that if there are any questions that you have about particular details of the appropriations budget, you have full realm to get that information, ask any questions that you need to ask to get clarity for Tuesday. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, absolutely, thank you. So have you completed? So provided that, is there a motion to approve this for submission to the Board of Education?
I'm,
Go ahead. Okay, I'll make a motion that we approve this for the annual appropriation resolution.
Yes. Well, items actually, yes, yes, the fiscal year 2020 budget, yes.
All four of them,
All four
501 through
action items.
504.
So 01 through 04.
I second.
There we go. Okay, Mr. Ragland,
I abstain.
Mr. Cole,
Yes.
Mr. Green, Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
That motion carried.
All right, thank you all. So as we move on to operations, maintenance, capital improvement, funding, I want to kind of preface this section before I pass the ball to our treasurer. I want to preface this with this thought in mind. Today is going to be a very brief, a conversation about process and timing discussion, specifically around a levy and or bond issue in moving towards that process for next year. What will come forth in discussion is the development of a millage committee. A few of us at the table have participated in this process in prior years, and feel free to add to the context of the conversation. But there are several different things that this is predicated on. The first, and again, Treasurer Pahorek will elaborate. I'll speak a little more genuinely and certainly can answer any fine-tuned questions I can answer. But it's predicated on several different things. One, you heard Mr. Gooding mention that everything that we're doing at this point, our status quo, our modus operandi has been setting a vision and aligning that vision, that strategy to a budget. So we've brought two constructs together and look at them and say, how do we identify a vision and those strategies attached to that, and then design a budget, behavioral budget, a value-based budget that's tied to that. So a part of this is going to be the expectation that upon the development of a millage committee, that we have available a presentation, a set of best cause or best implications for why it is we want to have that via a strategic plan, why we want to move forward with a possible levy or bond issue or PI for that matter. The other piece is making sure that we have a clear understanding of what the final biennial budget approved by the end of this month is going to be. So there are two strong assumptions here. One, that we will have a strategic plan that we can draw from that spells out a clear vision about what we're trying to do to move the district to next. The other piece is having a clearer idea of what our state budget appropriation is going to be. In addition to that, there may be some other analysis that come forward, whether it's an opportunity study that's being convened, any number of things that may attribute to some financial assumptions we have to consider for a levy and/or bond issue or PI. But we want to make sure that we have best case available to the board and to a millage committee to ensure that we've kicked the discussion off correctly. If you guys will pull out this document here, and again, I will just shortly pass the ball to Treasurer Bohoric. This is comprised of what would be those driving factors, if you will, of a levy and/or bond issue. So any ballot initiative for a millage committee to consider. The second page addresses the timeline that we're using. It's a proactive timeline. I won't say aggressive. I will say it's a proactive timeline that's designed fundamentally to ensure that a millage committee and the board have more than reasonable time to convene a discussion around what this looks like, and then have a conversation even with the community with regards to that as well. So that by the time we give a hard start in June 2020 with the necessary filings to kick off a ballot issue or set of ballot issues, we are more than prepared. And we've gotten the opportunity to get some practical feedback, if that makes sense. So with that, Treasurer Bohoric, I pass it to you.
I think you've done a great job, thank you. We can calm down. Actually, thank you. You know, as you already know, this Finance Committee was formed, at least in part, to, on an ongoing basis, review the financial condition as well as the financial outlook for the school district. So on a regular basis, you see the monthly financial reports, you see how we're doing against what our best estimates are for plans on an annual basis. Then you get to participate in the budget process with all the budget directors and see how that's put together again on an annual basis. And then in the spring and fall of each year, you get to see what that all looks like on a longer term basis as we complete a 5-year plan as required by law, but I extend that out another 3 years, and with no compunction in saying this, but that's to extend it beyond 2 levy cycles so that we see where we are in the current levy cycle and where we might be in the next levy cycle. And school finance, you live from levy cycle to levy cycle. And to not talk about that publicly is, in my opinion, over my 40-plus years of service, not acceptable. So we are addressing that and at least looking at that picture so that we see what's coming down the road. When we do the 5-year forecast, I talk about early indicators, leading indicators, if you want to use that economic term too. Well, when will some action on the board's part, on the district's part, be required to address a deteriorating financial position? And that is definitely defined by declining cash balance, because we are a cash business. We live and die by cash, and we keep our books on a cash basis. So that is something that obviously we watch. So you've seen that process. Now you know why we do all that, put that together, because as I think Chairman Cole used the phrase, we want to be proactive, not reactive. When we learned of the reduction in state revenue from what we had forecasted, then we had to make an immediate reaction, but we were able to do that over time rather than do it in a very short time period. And as you well know, any correction that you can spread out over time is just less painful to do. We then started this calendar year, 2019, with a very methodical approach to presenting capital funding, which is typically outside of the general fund. So we talked about sources of capital funding, the interplay of that with our deferred maintenance needs, our longer-term needs as prescribed in the facility master plan, how the OFCC, Ohio Facility, whatever OFCC stands for, used to be the Ohio School Facility Commission, OSFC, but the folks that co-fund some of the projects that we have, as we talked about locally funded initiatives and all that. So all of that was a primer leading up to the really large expenditures for the district, the general operating fund on the one hand, and then capital expenditures and understanding what those needs are on an ongoing basis, and then on those long-term investments that we need to make in our legacy buildings that have yet to be touched as part of the facility master plan. So all of those discussions lead up to a point to say to this committee, at some point, you're in a levy cycle, and then by, say, levy cycle, typically it's 4 years. And I'm going to say typically presidential elections tend, I'll be frank, tend to be more favorable for schools to pass levies than non-presidential cycles. So you align yourselves to being successful, because that's what we want to be. We want to be successful. Is it because we just want to pass levies? No. It's because we want to have a sustainable financial plan, a sustainable financial mechanism for funding the academic program. As Scott said before, he and I tried to turn the budgeting process, well, we actually did, turn the budgeting process upside down. Program drives the budget. So as we see budget numbers give us some signals that we're not going to be able to sustain this on a long-term basis, sustain the academic program, those are the signals that we need to then have this discussion today. So that's kind of what brings us here today. As we prepared for this discussion, Vice President Cole and I conversed about how do we kind of distill this down into understandable pieces and parts, if you will. We kind of came up with what I call 3 buckets in terms of funding and our funding needs. The first being your general operations, typically general operating fund, the general fund, and some of the factors that will go into this discussion. Some we've had here, but certainly for the Levy Millage Committee, some of those factors, as Vice President Cole pointed out, the academic strategic plan. Unfortunately, this is all in the same size font. If I were to do it in a font to indicate relative importance, this would be inordinately large, take up almost the entire page, and all the other items on this page would be, of lesser size font. So let us not have how this is presented in terms of size or boldness or anything indicate the magnitude of importance. But academic strategic plan is really a key on this general operations. Again, we're coming to the end of the state biennial budget process and discussion, so we don't know where we're going to be, but that will be critical at least for us to know for our planning purposes, kind of an absolute for the next 2 years. And as you also well know, we're in the midst of bargaining with one of our unions, and then there will be bargaining that ensues thereafter over the next several months. So the outcomes of that will also play into this as well. I'm going to jump over to the right-hand side of the bucket and talk about long-term capital improvements, and those are the ones where you're completely renovating a building or tearing down and building new. And those are tied into the facility master plan. We refer to our buildings that haven't been touched as legacy buildings, and then the OFSFC funding over there. And I I jump over here because on the left-hand side, funding there is typically in the form of a continuous operating levy. And funding for the long-term capital investment is typically a bond issue. The bond issue in the 20 to 30-year time frame. So you spread the cost of those assets out over time. So 2 different funding mechanisms. The continuing operating levy is passed, stays on the tax duplicate on the tax bill forever. Ostensibly, I guess, is the best way to put that. But the bond issue is on the tax duplicate for 25, 30 years, and then as the bonds are paid off, it comes off the duplicate. Now, in the middle here is this third bucket for addressing ongoing and deferred maintenance needs, also called capital funds. These are a little bit different. These are life cycle replacement things like school buses, trucks, other various pieces of equipment that we have concertedly over the past several years decided to pull out of general operating dollars and fund with a different source of revenue so that it's separate and separately identifiable. Quite frankly, it's so to protect our infrastructure, because often if you run into problems over on the operating side, the first thing to go are maintenance items, because you don't want to go into the classroom. You don't want to reduce staff. You do all the things that you try and do that won't affect that. and inevitably, that's those maintenance-type items, and so you get behind. The district did get behind. So in 16, when we put an issue on the ballot that was a combination of operating, permanent improvement, and bond, that bond portion was not for necessarily the long-term capital improvements, but that bond was to give us a jump start, to give us that initial shot in the arm of $125 million to begin to, in a very speedy way, begin to address those deferred maintenance needs. Then on an ongoing basis, that half-mil PI levy, permanent improvement levy, stays on the books. The half-mil at that time generated about $4.5 million, and that will be around on an ongoing basis so that once we get caught up, we should stay caught up. I would tell you, don't think that because that half-mil and the 125 was passed, that addressed all of the needs. It did not. I have numbers that I can put forth for you to tell you what those numbers should be, but we're not at that point yet. So that's why this is kind of on a continuum, operating on one side, funded through a continuous operating levy. In the middle, the combo platter of permanent improvement and bond issue maybe, and then bond issue to fund the longer-term investment needs of our infrastructure. How that morphs together, how that all comes out, is part of what this leverage millage committee will do. They'll be given a charge to listen to our presentations, as Vice President Nicole mentioned. We will get a charge to have a presentation available and ready and made to both the board and this committee on an academic plan and the strategies and financial plan to support that. Certainly, a presentation. Is Maurice here tonight? Yes. So Maurice is now on notice that there will be a presentation on deferred maintenance and how to address that, and life cycle replacement. Where are we? What have we done? What have we been able to do with Operation Fix-It? What are our real needs in that area? And then FMP. What do we do with FMP, the Facility Master Plan? Do we, revisit? Do we take it as it is? And what's our position with FCC? How much of this can be co-funded? How much of it that's in our plans can't be. That kind of discussion will then be made in a presentation to this committee. So at this point, this is just kind of a culmination of, hey, we've been talking to you about finances for a while. We see some indicators that it's time to begin this levy discussion, and that's what we're asking this committee to consider this evening. On the second page, the timeline, and I will take about 98% credit for the timeline, and there's no pride of authorship. It can be certainly modified. But I've laid this out certainly working backwards. You start on the upper right-hand corner with the November 2020 general election and work backwards. And these are rough dates. All districts get from bond councils these letters that give you all the ballot deadlines, and they are described as 90 days, no less than 90 days, but no more than 120 days before the last date on a Tuesday, which occurred in the third week of the fourth month after it rained on a Monday. And you're like, what the heck is that? So I've distilled that down to just, look, in August we have to do this, in June we have to do this. Don't worry about whether it's August 5th or August 10th. Just worry about it's August. It just gets way overburdensome because there's 90-day deadlines and 110-day deadlines, and it's bizarre. We'll take care of that. Just follow along. So in November, that's the election. By August, we're adopting several types of resolutions to send to the county auditor for various certifications and resolutions to proceed to put things on the ballot. Because of the outstanding debt that we have, there are certain debt limits by statute that we're not allowed to exceed without state approval. That occurs in July. That's what July is all about. That's why in June, this board has to be prepared to adopt at least some resolutions about bond issues if that's where you're headed. Okay? Now, I backed it up 30 days to May to say if that's the case, so that there's ample time, Board Member Ragland, ample time for the board to consider the Levy Millage Committee recommendations, the board need to see this like the first board meeting in May would be helpful. You back up from there, and you need an extended period of time for this committee to do its work. What should be in that green box marked August 2009 to April 2020, there is a bullet point missing. That's the community engagement bullet point, but that will be part of that levy millage committee work as well. So understand that during that, what is that, about 9-month period, there's committee work and there's community discussions going on all at that time. Pretty much led, I think, and oftentimes by the administration, in terms of giving the presentations on what's needed, but engaging, all of those stakeholders. That backs us up to, well, if the committee's going to start work in August, they need to be selected in August. And then that backs us up to the board needing to make a decision to, move forward with millage committee selection sometime in the month of July. And that process, there's no board meetings in July, but certainly that conversation is had in terms of who, what, when, where, how, in terms of membership composition. So it would be, I guess we're now open for discussion with this committee with the intention that if it's the committee's pleasure, that we would be able to report out to the board next Tuesday that is a recommendation of this committee to put this process, as tentatively outlined, in motion so that we can prepare ourselves for the 2020 ballot initiative. Now, understand that this does not predetermine the outcome of this process. This is an outline. So that millage committee could come together and look at all the data on the presentations and say yes, should say no, could say maybe so. If you can look back to 2016 when we formed a committee, we had two processes going on. One was the levy millage, the other was an FMP evaluation, an update. And we went from January to June. At the end of June, or by the time we got to June, the board elected to not proceed with a bond issue at that time. There were some unanswered FMP questions, but we did proceed with addressing operating needs and the deferred maintenance needs. So we did that three-pieced levy, which passed very handily. So I think this process, the engagement, leads to successful outcomes. Again, not just to pass a levy, but to provide sustainable financial resources for the operation of the district, and that's the key.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Are there any questions at this point for discussion? Yes, Mr. Ragland.
Thank you, Ms. Behort. Is there a standard operating procedure for this process that gives us some details on maybe even what we did in 2016 that really kind of lines these types of things out in detail, including criteria for millage committee, maybe a list of, past millage committees, and then, just really, I'd like to know the internal workings of these types of things, and I think we've done this enough to probably have something that is cataloged for me to kind of digest this. Is something like that available?
Yeah, and you mentioned, best practices. I don't know if it's best practice or not. It's mostly experience. All of us here that I know of, we've all been through levy preparation cycles before. They can vary a little bit from district to district, but certainly you could look back at 16 and look at the levy millage process. Sure. Both board members were a part of that process. They can help fill you in. I've got all sorts of documents from those because I was the record keeper, if you will, because those meetings were just like this. They're noticed, they have an agenda,
Absolutely.
They have minutes.
Right.
In fact, Paul, they were recorded as well, just like this is.
Yes, sir.
So that is all very well documented that you can get a feel for. But yes, and that's the long answer. The short answer is
No,
yes.
that's-
There's
that's
plenty
fine.
of stuff out there for you to look at.
So my next
Yes,
my
go
next
ahead.
question is around process. So by the board approving the start of this plan here on Tuesday, does that mean that a lot of the work regarding recommendations for the committee will begin in July with the goal of having something for the board to approve in the first August meeting, or that was a little bit gray for me.
Yeah, would one of the board members like to take, because the selection of that committee was not something that I participated in, and it was, I think, very heavily driven by board members.
Yes, it was.
So that really, you can make a little note there, board selects member of levy, that's you, Mr. Ragland. Board selects members of levy committee. So there you go. There's the detail behind that one.
So just to add further context to that. Yes, it was board work, myself, President Baker, former board member Hudson, all came together. We worked with the board to identify some 20 plus, but I think it was
Yes.
25 members
Yes.
of a millage committee. These members are diverse in composition, right? These are folks from the business community. These are folks from the faith community. These are folks from our nonprofit sector and our labor sector. So this was a diverse pool of people. Madam President was a part of that body as well, and a very vocal part of that body. So this is a big group of folks that we put together, and we then get presented information that is presented to the board first. So I want to be clear that information goes to the Board of Education first. And then that information is then submitted to the millage committee. It is digested and discussed in millage committee. They then provide a set of recommendations for the board to move forward. In this past iteration in 2016, there were several different options. Mr. President, I think there were 4, or maybe were there 4 or 6? 3 or 4. Yeah, there were several. Yeah, there were 6. There were 6. There were several different options that were discussed and then subsequently submitted to the board to approve. We as a board then made a final decision on which option we felt most confident to bring to the community. The community voted, and by providence, they accepted that. And we are where we are today as a result.
Sure, I guess my question was the process around the formation of the committee itself?
Yes, sir.
And will there be opportunity for, one, is there a list of qualifications for service on the committee, which I think
Yes.
Mr. Behort may provide that in the, standard operating procedure or whatever documentation I'll get there. And also, will the committee go before the board for approval before they begin their work? Based off the fact that we don't have a meeting in July, if we're deciding on the committee, will that come to us in, say, August or at some later, time throughout the year before they begin the work that led to where we are? I guess that's my specific question.
Speak a little louder for us, Board Member Brown, but thank you for your coming in.
If this is a good time, I just wanted to share a few thoughts on the process of putting the committee together. And I think that, it clearly needs to be diverse and represent all segments of the community.
Right, so but you're coming in and out, Board Member Brown, but the gist of what we've heard is that you're looking for diverse representation, diverse qualified representation?
But not only those engaged in the schools. Because 85% or more of our community is not engaged in the schools, but they will be asked to comment on we put on the ballot. The second point is that the committee membership be as independent as possible and not necessarily tied closely to the board. And that they be selected to be given some independence. So they're having a
Okay, so again, you're kind of going in and out, but the gist of what we're hearing you say, again, is you're looking for diversity, you're looking for qualifications, you're looking for representation outside of the school board that does not necessarily tie to board operations or in relationship to public education.
And the important thing I said is independent of the board, so that the committee is giving the financial situation a fresh, independent look with its recommendations that they will eventually make to the board.
I thank you for that. And again, just to add that context, what you speak of, what you're requesting is definitely what that process was in 2016. Most assuredly, that was the process in 2016. In fact, I was involved not only with that process, but even the process in 2008. That was the same, these were the same requirements. So we do have some best practices in play. We do have information that's available to board members. Board members will most assuredly have the opportunity to establish criteria under the leadership of President Baker and under the efficacy, the voice of each and every one of us. So there will be a process where we are deliberating on where we want, what qualifications we want to see, what things we want to see. But we want to make sure that the things that you've requested are included, but they are. They will be.
And independence is one of the primary things.
Yes, sir. That has been the situation and will certainly be an assumption in this moving forward.
Okay, again,
Thank you.
will the board vote on the final committee or not?
Mr. President?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what happened last time and what I would propose happens this time is if the board is ready to agree at its meeting on Tuesday to respond to the committee's recommendation, assuming the committee's going to make a recommendation that we raise a millage committee here today, my thought would be that then over the month of July.
Apologize, Mr. Baker, can you just, do our mics working?
But he doesn't hear the microphone. He doesn't hear
That's
the
all right.
microphone. That's the problem. So my assumption is that we'll follow the process that we followed last time. And according to this timeline, over the month of July, I do believe that board members would provide nominations of people they'd like to see on the committee. And then in August, what I assume we would do is then appoint the committee. The committee is appointed by the president, but everybody has had the opportunity to provide nominations, and the board can decide, we can discuss on Tuesday some of the parameters of the committee, perhaps how many we'd like to see on the committee. We did that last time, and it worked very well. And I would assume we'd follow the same
So is this-
process.
I'd like to go on the record now in stating that I feel like any formation of a millage committee should be subject to a vote of the entire board for approval for varying reasons that I will probably list in more detail on Tuesday. It is important to me that the entire board get an opportunity to vote on who's, not just our input on nominations, but there not be an appointment from the leader of this board, but that the entire board vote on the millage committee and its formation. I want to go on the record. I'd like that included in the minutes specifically today. And then I'll provide some reasoning for that. If we could discuss that, President Baker, during Tuesday's meeting, I would prefer that if possible. Sorry, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No, absolutely. No, I thank you for that feedback and don't see anything wrong with it personally, but thank you.
Thank you,
All
sir.
right.
As a past
Yes, Ms.
levy
Carson.
person for, I think, maybe 3 levies, I'm going to highly request that we're cautious with the numbers. The first 2 I sent on, it was way too many people.
Okay.
Way too many people. The third one worked better, the numbers were smaller, and then we went out to the community and got the community feedback and the community input, which helped the committee come up with the 6 proposals that we did, and then finally narrow it down to simply we were just going to do a bond levy on capital improvement and not go ask for additional funding. So all of that was a joint effort, Mr. Ragland. That was not a decision just by the committee nor just by the board. It was from community input. The levy committee members, various members participated in the community forums, heard the community, brought it back to brief and discuss. So my biggest concern is whomever's on this committee, however it's appointed, that it's not very large. I think at one point, and it's been several committees, so I'm a bit confused. I think we might have 20-something people. It was way too
It was
many.
25.
Yeah, it was way too many.
Are there any other statements, feedbacks, thoughts? Okay. So provided that, and I thank you for your feedback on that, because it's actually rich and definitely constructive. Everything is not going to be done the same way it's always been done. But the key thing that I want everybody to be sure of is that feedback will be drawn in, and the board will give prime consideration onto the parameters and how this process will be developed. So please do keep that in mind. Ms. Johnson.
And I made an assumption that when you were describing the different iterations, it was this last one that was the most successful makeup. Is that right? So it was the 2016, okay.
All right, provided that, are we prepared to approve a recommendation to move request for the board to begin the process of searching for a millage committee?
So moved.
All right, we have a motion and we have a second? All right.
Okay,
If you have a comment to add.
As long as the motion itself means that we're doing a discovery of the process. I just don't want to assume that we're just adopting the process from the last time. I want to make sure that the entire process will be viewed by the entire board, and we're engaging in creating a new process this time.
So what this committee is doing is simply saying that we are we're moving forward the opportunity for the board to discuss in our forum, moving forward with a millage committee search. At that point in time, we can discuss more robustly what those parameters are, what it is we like to see.
Yes, sir. Gotcha.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. So, are we
so
ready to call the roll?
when we go to write these minutes, I would, in my words, say that it's being, the adopted resolution from the committee would be to recommend to the board that they begin the process, whatever that is, the process for the formation of a levy millage committee.
Can we change the to A?
Sure. And when I write them, I'll call you. and
Yes, sir.
we'll-
I mean, for me, the
That-
implies specificity.
That's fine, that's fine. So it's meant to be generic, just to say, board, we're recommending that you move forward to begin to plan. And that beginning, you got a choice. You can say, begin to plan to put an issue on the November ballot, or you can say, begin a process for formulating a levy millage committee in anticipation of the November 2020 ballot.
Yes, sir.
Does that sound better?
And
A,
again,
A,
language that can certainly be,
Right.
yes, I'm fine with it, but language that will certainly be submitted to the board for further deliberation.
All set?
Yes, sir?
Okay. Mr. Green? Yes. Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Miller? Yes. Mr. Ragland?
Yes.
And Mr. Cole?
Yes.
That motion carried.
All right. All right, thank you for that. Moving forward, bond issuance update, Mr.
Yeah,
Treasurer.
just wanted to give you an update on something that I've mentioned to you, in the past. As you know, Operation Fix-It was a $125 million bond issue approved by the voters in November of 2016. At that time, we said we would issue bonds on an as-needed basis, not all at once, which is exactly what we did. So in January of 2017, we issued $75 million in bonds to fund the first, what we thought would be about 3 years' worth of construction needs. It was my target that we would not come back to market until we were well under 20 to 25% of unexpended funds, and I had projected that to be somewhere around September or October of this year. As it stands right now, this fund has, I think, about $30 million in it, about $22 million is encumbered, so there's about $8 million unencumbered. That's, about 6%. Of the fund. So we're at the point where I need to get back to the marketplace and kind of, put some more cash in the fund. I'd like to come up with a fancy term, but that's what we're proposing to do. So the beginning part of the process, other than planning for when we would issue bonds, one of the first things we do is we select an underwriting firm. The board has previously approved a pool of firms. We talked with half a dozen of those firms, actually requested information from them, reviewed it on Monday, went through what they had to say based upon the questions that we asked. And while all the firms are very highly qualified and capable, we've elected for this $50 million issue, to go with a sole underwriter, and that's Stifel Nicholas and Company. They have been in the underwriting pool with all the others for a while. I think they've been co-manager on maybe one or two other deals, but they're going to be the lead manager on this deal. After this, the next step is to prepare the preliminary official statement. It's one of the things that our controller, Mike McCammon, just loves to do. That's his job. So he'll be working with bond counsel and our municipal advisors to put all that statistical and financial information together for a preliminary official statement, which is a rather lengthy document if you'd like to read one of those. And then we'll be preparing for rating agency presentations. I think our plan is sometime in August to present to the rating agencies to get a rating on the bonds with, September, October marketing date, somewhere around in there. So timing-wise, I think it's working out very, very well. And I just wanted to give you an update of where we are on that process and what we've done so far. So we're moving forward, I think, at the right pace.
Any questions at this point? Mr. Miller?
What was the rating on the initial issuance? I forgot.
What's our rating?
Yeah.
I think it's,
Wasn't it double A?
it's double A, yeah.
Yeah.
I've always asked the rating agencies why the city can be triple A and we're double A. And
They put that extra quarter on the
they
dollar
don't,
side.
they don't bite on that. But,
They got their rainy day, that's what it is.
yeah, we're not anticipating any change in rating whatsoever. The good news is that this time at this rating presentation, we're still, so to speak, on the heels of favorable voter approval, and they look very highly at voter support. We have, good-looking financials, so that's in our favor. But there's been no suggestion to me that we could push for an upgrade. But there's no reason that I see for any change in rating, especially not to the downside.
Anyone else? I have a quick question, and we've kind of had this before, but again, I'm just a question. With regard to triple bond rating and AAA and AA, if there is opportunity for a subdivision like ours to possibly go in on a shared bond initiative with the city, does that strengthen our position?
You would have to have the city agree to that. And so if they were willing to issue debt on behalf of the schools, you could use their rating. But that's just very unusual.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very unusual.
Thanks.
No, I've just seen
I know
others.
they're good partners.
Right,
but
right.
yeah,
No,
I think,
I've
yeah.
seen other school districts utilize shared funding. Akron did that. I've seen co-facilities that have been developed between a school district and a municipality in southwestern city schools. I've seen some variation of this. I just wanted to ask that, but thank you.
Yeah, and that's, in having discussions with the city, that would be, I mean, something to maybe think about, but they agreed to that. And sometimes it's the city who's leading that charge too, yeah.
Thank you for that.
I'm good.
All right. If there are no questions, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
All right.
Second.
All right, awesome.
Okay, Mr. Cole,
Yes.
Mr. Green, Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Miller, Mr. Ragland.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you all so much for attending. Thank you for your feedback, participation. This was awesome. Thank you.